The room was loud, not chaotic, just confident. Heavy footsteps echoed across the polished gym floor as a towering figure moved through the crowd like he owned the space, 2 meters tall, broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of presence that makes conversations lower automatically. People parted without being asked. He laughed loudly at something someone said, the kind of laugh meant to be heard. Dominance wasn't something he turned on. It was his default setting. Then the door opened quietly. No dramatic entrance, no music shift. Just a man stepping inside like he had nowhere to prove and nothing to protect. Black jacket, dark shirt, calm posture, measured walk. No rush, no scanning for attention, just stillness and motion. A few people recognized him instantly. Others didn't, but the giant did. He looked over, paused, then smirked. "You serious?" he said loudly, making sure nearby conversation stopped. "That's him." The room tilted toward the tension. The older man didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't even slow down. The giant stepped forward now, closing distance with exaggerated confidence. Up close, the size difference was obvious. The giant leaned slightly downward, invading space. "I thought you'd be taller," he mocked. A few scattered laughs, nervous ones. The kind people make when they're unsure whether they should. Still no reaction. The older man simply adjusted his stance, not defensively, comfortably. The giant circled once, like he was inspecting something unimpressive. "You look retired," he added, shaking his head. Someone in the back pulled out a phone. Another followed, because something about the silence felt heavier than the jokes. The older man finally looked up. Not angry, not challenged, just focused. That calm eye contact did something subtle. It shifted the air. The giant noticed it too. So he did what insecure dominance always does when it feels resistance. He escalated, a light shove to the shoulder. Not hard enough to start a fight, just enough to assert control. Gasps. A phone camera lifted higher, and that's when it happened. Not the shove, not the mocking, not the laugh, but the stillness after. Because in that silence, you could feel something changing. The giant thought he was performing, thought he was entertaining the room, but the room wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching. And the older man, he hadn't moved an inch. No defensive stance, no raised voice, just balance, just breath, just awareness. From this moment forward, everything that mattered happened in 9 seconds. Before anyone talks about what happened in those 9 seconds, you need to understand who he was. The giant wasn't just tall. He was known, 6'7", nearly 2 meters. Built like someone who never missed leg day and never skipped an opportunity to remind you of it. Former semi-pro athlete. Local gym favorite. The guy people tagged in lifting videos and called unstoppable. In this space, he wasn't just another face. He was the energy. He controlled conversations without trying. When he joked, people laughed. When he walked past, people noticed. When he stood somewhere, that became the center of the room. And he loved that. Dominance had become part of his identity. Not just physical dominance, social dominance. The kind that feeds on reactions, on attention, on validation. That's why when he saw the older man walk in, calm, quiet, not seeking approval, it irritated something small inside him. Because real confidence doesn't compete, and insecure confidence can't stand that. He nudged the guy next to him. "Watch this," he muttered, already smiling. To him it was harmless, just entertainment. Just a moment to remind the room who the alpha was. He stepped forward again, rolling his shoulders like a performer warming up for a stage. "You here to train?" he asked loudly. The older man stopped walking, turned slightly, calm eyes, no tension in his jaw. "No," he replied simply. That calm tone only made the giant push harder. "You sure? We've got beginner classes too." He laughed. A few people chuckled again, but softer this time, because something felt off. The older man didn't react like someone embarrassed. He didn't defend himself, didn't justify his presence, didn't match energy with energy. He just stood there, balanced, still, present. And that's when the dynamic began to shift, even if most people didn't consciously realize it yet. The giant stepped closer, too close, close enough that the size difference became the headline of the moment. "You don't look like much," he said, voice lower now but still loud enough for everyone nearby. Silence stretched. The older man finally met his eyes fully, and in that brief eye contact, something subtle happened. No fear, no anger, just assessment, like he was measuring distance, breathing steady, posture relaxed. The giant mistook it for passiveness, and that was his mistake, because he'd spent his life overpowering reactions. He didn't know how to read restraint. Phones were fully out now. People sensed something brewing, not because of shouting, but because of the quiet. The giant smirked again, turning slightly to the small audience forming behind him. "You see this?" he said. "This is what confidence looks like when it expires." That line got a louder reaction. He fed off it instantly, and then casually, almost playfully, he placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. Not violently, not yet. Just enough to assert dominance. He thought he was controlling the moment, but control doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. The older man's stance shifted, barely noticeable. Weight redistributed, breath timed, focus locked, and the countdown was about to begin. The giant's hand was still on his shoulder, heavy, deliberate. A silent message to everyone watching: "I'm in control." The older man didn't brush it off, didn't step back, didn't react. He simply looked down at the hand, then back up at the giant, calm, steady, unshaken. That eye contact did something unexpected. It didn't challenge. It didn't submit. It neutralized. And that neutrality unsettled the giant more than defiance ever could. "Relax," the giant said with a grin, squeezing slightly. "Don't be so serious." A few nervous laughs echoed, but the room wasn't relaxed. Not anymore. People had stopped pretending this was harmless, because the air had changed. The older man gently removed the giant's hand from his shoulder, not aggressively, not dramatically, just precise, controlled, and that tiny movement, that quiet correction, drew more attention than any shove would have. The giant blinked once, surprised. It wasn't resistance he felt, it was balance. He stepped closer again, reclaiming space. Now they were nearly chest to chest. The size difference looked almost unreal. The giant towered over him. But something strange was happening. The bigger man looked like he was trying to prove something. The smaller one looked like he didn't need to. "You think I'm joking?" the giant asked, voice dropping lower. The older man tilted his head slightly. "I think you're performing," he replied. The words weren't loud, but they landed. A few people in the back murmured. That hit, because it was true. The giant's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being read that easily, especially not in front of an audience. And that's when ego does what ego always does when it feels exposed. It pushes harder. The giant gave a sharper shove this time. Not enough to knock him down, but enough to show intent. Gasps, phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "Oh no." The older man shifted half a step back, not stumbling, not off balance, just adjusting. Eyes still calm, breathing unchanged. And in that moment, the giant mistook patience for weakness. He raised his voice again. "You gonna do something?" Silence. The older man's expression didn't change, but something else did. His posture, subtle, almost invisible to an untrained eye. Feet aligned, shoulders relaxed, center lowered slightly. He wasn't preparing to attack. He was preparing to respond. From here, everything happened in 9 seconds. The camera angle tightens. Crowd noise fades slightly. Heartbeat sound design builds under the tension. Second one, the giant steps in aggressively. Second 2, he reaches forward, this time not playful. Second 3, the older man exhales slowly, not fear timing. Second 4, the giant grabs for his collar, and in that exact instant, the dynamic shifts, not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision. The room doesn't know it yet. The giant definitely doesn't know it. But the next 5 seconds are about to erase everything he thought dominance meant. Second 5, the giant's fingers tighten around the collar. He expects resistance. He expects panic. He expects the flinch. He gets none. Second 6, the older man doesn't pull away. He steps in just half a step, closing the distance instead of creating it. That alone confuses the giant's balance, because force expects retreat, not entry. Second 7, a subtle pivot, barely visible. The older man's foot shifts outside the giant's stance. His shoulder rotates slightly. Not explosive, efficient. The giant doesn't even realize what's happening yet. He just feels something unfamiliar. His weight drifting. Second 8, the older man's hand moves. Not a punch, not a grab. Just a controlled redirection at the wrist and elbow. Minimal effort, maximum timing. The giant's own forward pressure becomes his enemy. His center of gravity tips past the point of control. And for the first time since this started, his eyes change. From dominance to confusion. Second 9, impact, not violent, not theatrical, but undeniable. The giant hits the mat hard enough to shake the floor. A collective gasp explodes through the room. Phones jolt. Someone swears under their breath. Silence follows instantly. The older man steps back, one clean step, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing steady. No victory pose, no aggression, just space. The giant stares at the ceiling for a split second, trying to process what just happened. Because physically, it doesn't make sense to him. He's heavier, stronger, bigger, and yet, he's on the ground. He rolls to one knee, embarrassed heat rising up his neck. The crowd that laughed minutes ago isn't laughing now. Their faces have shifted, not shocked at violence, but stunned by effortlessness. There were no wild swings, no flashy combination, no dramatic slam, just timing, balance, control. The older man looks down at him, not with anger, not with mockery, just clarity. "You rely on size," he says quietly. The room is so silent that everyone hears it, but size doesn't control balance. The giant pushes himself up quickly, adrenaline spiking. Humiliation burns hotter than pain. He steps forward again, then stops, because this time, he's not sure. Something invisible has changed. The social gravity flipped. Moments ago, he owned the room. Now the room is studying him, judging, measuring, and the older man, still calm, still centered, still unmoved. No one cheers, no one claps, because it doesn't feel like a show anymore. It feels like a lesson. The giant exhales sharply, trying to regain dominance through posture. But posture without confidence collapses fast. "You got lucky," he mutters. The older man tilts his head slightly. "Luck doesn't repeat," he replies. That line hits deeper than the fall, because everyone in the room knows that wasn't luck. That was discipline meeting ego, and discipline winning in 9 seconds. The older man turns slightly, as if the moment is already over for him. Because to someone trained in control, it was never dramatic, it was inevitable. The giant is standing again, but something is different now. His shoulders are still wide, his frame is still massive. Yet the presence that filled the room earlier is gone, because dominance isn't just physical, it's social, and socially he just fell harder than he did on the mat. The crowd that once laughed at his jokes now watches him carefully, not impressed, not entertained, evaluating. Phones are still up, but the energy has flipped. Minutes ago he controlled the narrative, now he's inside it. He rolls his neck, trying to shake off the embarrassment. "You think that proved something," he says, forcing a smirk. But the smirk doesn't reach his eyes. The older man studies him calmly. "I didn't need to prove anything," he replies. And that line lands heavier than the takedown, because it exposes the real difference between them. One was performing, the other was prepared. The giant looks around briefly, searching for laughter, for backup, for validation. He finds none. Even his closest friends aren't smiling anymore. They're quiet, processing, because they didn't just see strength, they saw control dismantle aggression. The older man adjusts his jacket slightly, not hurried, not tense, just composed. He confused noise with power. He continues calmly. The giant clenches his jaw. "You think you're better than me?" "No," the older man says evenly. "I think I'm disciplined." Silence again, and that word disciplined hangs in the air. It's not flashy, not dramatic, but it's undeniable. The giant takes one slow step back, just one, but everyone notices, because earlier he only moved forward. Now instinct is telling him something else. The older man doesn't advance, doesn't crowd him, doesn't capitalize, because true control doesn't chase humiliation. It ends conflict. "You're strong," the older man says quietly. That surprises everyone, including the giant, but strength without control becomes predictable. The giant exhales sharply. He understands now, not fully, but enough to know that if he steps forward again, the outcome won't change, and that's the real defeat, not the fall. The certainty. The room feels heavier than before, but calmer, like a storm just passed. The older man glances around briefly at the onlookers. "Conflict feeds ego," he says. "Control feeds respect." A few subtle nods in the crowd, because they felt it, the shift. Respect didn't move toward the bigger man, it moved toward the calmer one. The giant swallows pride, and pride is harder to swallow than pain. For the first time since this started, he doesn't speak, doesn't mock, doesn't posture. He simply stands there, realizing that his size protected him from challenge for years, until it didn't. The older man turns slightly toward the exit. Not dismissively, just done, because for him the lesson is complete, and as he walks away slowly, no one stops him. No one questions him, no one laughs. They part naturally, not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. Behind him, the giant remains still, Not physically hurt, but psychologically shifted. And sometimes, that shift lasts longer than any bruise ever could. By the time the door closed behind him, the room still hadn't fully exhaled. Conversations restarted slowly. Whispers first, then full sentences. Did you see that? He didn't even try. It was so fast. Phones were already replaying the moment, frame by frame, second by second. But what surprised everyone most was how simple it looked. No wild technique, no dramatic slam, just timing. The giant stayed near the center of the mat longer than he expected to, not because he couldn't move, but because walking away now felt heavier than falling did earlier. His friends approached cautiously. "You good?" one asked. He nodded quickly. "Yeah, I slipped." But even he didn't believe it, because deep down he knew. That wasn't a slip, that was exposure. Across town, the older man walked calmly down the sidewalk. Traffic passed, people moved normally. To anyone watching, nothing extraordinary had happened. His breathing was steady, heart rate normal, because for him, it wasn't personal, it was principle. Back at the gym, the video had already hit social media. Short clip, 9 seconds. 2-meter giant mocked him. Watch what happens. Within an hour, thousands of views. Comments flooding in. Size isn't everything. That calm was scary. He didn't even look mad. The giant saw it before he wanted to. A friend showed him. He watched silently, from the outside perspective, and something about it felt different. In his memory, he felt in control. In the video, he looked loud, predictable, almost desperate. And that realization stung more than the fall. Because the internet doesn't just replay moments, it magnifies them. Meanwhile, comments weren't mocking him as much as he expected. They were analyzing him, breaking down ego, talking about discipline, talking about composure. And suddenly, he wasn't the alpha of the room. He was the example. That shift was harder to process than the physical takedown. Later that night, he sat alone longer than usual, phone in hand, scrolling, rewatching. Not the fall, but the seconds before it, the eye contact, the calm breathing, the lack of reaction. And for the first time, he questioned something. What if dominance isn't volume? What if control isn't size? What if confidence doesn't need witnesses? The older man, on the other hand, never posted about it, never addressed it, never acknowledged the viral moment. Because discipline doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't need applause. It simply exists. The next morning, the gym felt different, quieter, not tense, just reflective. The giant walked in again. Same height, same build. But something subtle had changed. He wasn't scanning for reactions. He wasn't performing. He wasn't seeking attention. He trained, quietly. And that might have been the real 9-second transformation. Because sometimes, the strongest impact isn't the one that drops you. It's the one that makes you rethink who you are. And that lesson lasts far longer than any viral clip ever will. A week later, the video had crossed millions of views. Different pages reposted it, different captions, different music edits, but the same 9 seconds. Over and over again, slow motion, zoomed angles, breakdowns. People weren't just watching the fall. They were studying the calm before it. Comment sections were divided. Embarrassing. He deserved it. That's real discipline. Size means nothing without control. But something unexpected happened. The giant stopped responding. No defensive posts, no excuses. No, it was taken out of context. Silence. Because deep down, he understood something most people never admit. He wasn't defeated by strength. He was exposed by composure. And that realization reshapes a person. Back at the gym, the energy felt different now. Not tense, not awkward, just aware. People still respected his size, but they no longer feared it. Because fear fades when dominance is questioned. One afternoon, as he was finishing a workout, someone new approached him. "You're the guy from the video, right?" A pause, a choice. He could deny it, laugh it off, blame the angle. Instead, he nodded. The person hesitated. That was humbling. He exhaled lightly. "Yeah," he said again. It was. And that simple admission did more for his image than any excuse could have. Because growth speaks louder than ego ever did. Across town, the older man continued life as usual. No interviews, no reaction videos, no celebration. If anything, he looked the same as always, balanced, present, unbothered. Because for him, the moment was never about dominance. It was about discipline. And discipline doesn't need replay value. It's consistent. The real lesson wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about size. It wasn't even about winning. It was about emotional control under pressure, because anyone can be calm when respected. The rare ones stay calm when challenged, and that's what shifted the room, not the fall. The stillness before it. Now here's the real question. If roles were reversed, if someone twice your size mocked you publicly, would you react? Would you escalate? Or would you control the moment? Drop your answer in the comments. To go. If you think pride always takes over, type discipline. If you believe control wins long term. I read them all, because moments like this aren't just stories, they're mirrors, and sometimes, the loudest lesson in the room comes from the quietest person standing in it. It only took 9 seconds, but for one man, it reshaped how he defined strength. And for everyone watching, it proved something simple: power impresses, control transforms.